On a blistering harvest afternoon in 1856, the fields of Alabama ran red. 5 overseers, armed with whips and rifles, were hacked to death by the very men they sought to control. Their killers were not soldiers. They were enslaved laborers, wielding only the tools of their bondage sickles sharpened for cotton and wheat. This was no accident. It was a revolt, a massacre born of desperation, and one the South tried to bury in silence. His name was Abram. Born in chains on Alabama soil, Abram had worked the fields for nearly 3 decades. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hands calloused from years of cutting cotton and cane. To the masters, Abram was strong property, valued for his body, but nothing more. To his fellow enslaved, he was a quiet leader, a man who carried himself with a steady fire in his eyes. The plantation where Abram lived was owned by Judge William Harper, a wealthy planter and magistrate. Harper believed slavery was his divine right, the foundation of his fortune, but he rarely dirtied his own hands. Instead, he entrusted control of his fields to a band of overseers, 5 men who enforced order with brutality. Each dawn, bells rang before the sun rose. Enslaved men and women were driven from their cabins, forced into the fields under the watch of mounted overseers. The sickle was their constant companion, a curved blade meant for harvest, but also a symbol of endless toil. Overseers barked quotas, cracked whips, and struck down anyone who Abram bore scars across his back from the lash. He had seen neighbors whipped until their flesh tore, women dragged into barns at night, children beaten for crying. The overseers ruled through violence and humiliation. But cruelty plants seeds. For some, those seeds grow into despair. For Abram, they grew into something else. Rage. Life on the plantation was relentless. Summers burned with heat that left throats dry and skin blistered. Winters brought cold nights in drafty cabins with only scraps of cloth for warmth. Food was ration cornmeal, pork fat, beans when luck permitted. Illness spread quickly. Death was constant. Abram endured it all, but he never forgot the moment that broke him. One autumn, his younger brother Moses fell behind in the fields, his body weak from fever. An overseer struck him with a whip again and again, until Moses collapsed. Abram rushed forward, but another overseer struck him down with the butt of a rifle. Moses never rose again. His shallow grave was dug on the edge of the cotton rows. From that day, Abram swore he would have vengeance. The breaking point came in the harvest season of 1856. The fields were heavy with cotton, and the overseers pressed the enslaved harder than ever. Whips cracked endlessly, rifles slung on shoulders as threats. Abram watched them closely. He saw their routines, when they walked together, when they separated, when their guard lowered. At night, in the cabins, whispers grew. Abram spoke softly, his voice calm but firm. They could not endure forever. They could not wait for freedom to come to them. They would take it or die trying. He reminded them of Moses, of children stolen, of lashes endured. Slowly, others agreed. The plan was simple and terrible. They would use the sickles. On a chosen day, while the overseers pressed them in the fields, they would turn their tools from harvest to war. They would strike together, fast, with fury. The day arrived. August 1856. The sun was merciless, the air heavy with dust and sweat. Overseers rode among the rows, barking orders, their whips slicing the air. Abram bent low, his hands gripping the curved blade of his sickle. Around him, others tightened their grips too. Then Abram gave the signal. The first blow was sudden, shocking. A sickle arced through the air, slashing deep into the neck of an overseer who had just raised his whip. Blood sprayed across the cotton plants. Shouts of confusion erupted. Before the other overseers could react, Abram lunged forward, his sickle driving into another man's chest. The fields exploded in chaos. Overseers drew their pistols, firing wildly, but they were outnumbered. Enslaved men rushed them with sickles, hoes, and bare hands. The sound of blades striking flesh mixed with screams and gunfire. Horses reared, panicked, throwing riders into the dirt. One overseer tried to flee, sprinting toward the stables. Abram chased him down, dragging him into the rows. The man's cries were cut short by the slice of steel. Another was pulled from his horse, pinned to the ground by 3 men, and hacked until he no longer moved. By the time the sun dipped low, it was done. 5 overseers lay dead in the fields, their blood soaking into the soil they had once commanded. The enslaved stood together, sickles dripping red, their chests heaving with both terror and exhilaration. For Abram and the others, it was a moment of grim triumph. They had turned the tools of their bondage into weapons of freedom. But freedom is fragile. Word spread quickly. Other planters rode in with rifles and dogs. Militias formed, determined to crush the uprising. Abram and his comrades scattered into the woods, seeking refuge in swamps and hidden trails. For a brief time, some tasted true freedom in the wilderness. But the South was merciless. Bloodhounds tracked them. Militias dragged captives back in chains. The punishments were brutal. Some were executed on the spot. Others were hanged in town squares, their bodies left as warnings. Still others were whipped until their flesh tore, then branded, then forced back into labor. Abram's fate was sealed. He was captured within weeks, betrayed by someone seeking favor from the whites. Taken to the county courthouse, he was tried swiftly, condemned without mercy. Witnesses said he walked to the gallows with his head held high, refusing to bow to the end. His body swung from the rope, a warning to all who watched. The revolt of 1856 terrified Alabama. Newspapers called it savagery, barbarity. Politicians demanded harsher laws, stricter patrols, tighter chains. The story of Abram and the Sickle Revolt was quickly buried, erased from official records. For the South, it was too dangerous to remember. But among the enslaved, the story survived. In whispered tales, in songs sung softly at night, Abram's name lived on. He was remembered not as a criminal, but as a man who avenged his brother, who struck down 5 overseers with the very blades meant to enslave him. History, written by the victors, tried to silence him. But the soil of Alabama remembers. The fields that drank the blood of overseers remember. And when we listen closely, we can still hear the sound of sickles slicing through more than cotton. This was Abram's story. The story of a man who turned harvest into rebellion, who struck fear into the heart of slavery. This was Abram's story. But many remain untold. If you want to uncover more hidden slave revolts and forgotten histories, click on the playlist here. And if you believe voices like Abram's deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and join us as we continue to bring the shadows of history into the light.